Welcome to What About PS, a Poland Syndrome podcast, where we talk about all things Poland Syndrome. The episodes that you can look forward to in this podcast speak about the male and female experience, motherhood and breastfeeding, general day-to-day living, health and fitness, and also including hand and chest affected people who have Poland Syndrome. If you have Poland Syndrome, or if you know of someone who has Poland Syndrome, then be sure to have a look out and listen to our latest episodes. Welcome guys to another episode of What About PS. Today we are talking about the male experience. So we have Lewis, Clay, and Kim with us. They're going to share their experiences with Poland Syndrome and also share their experiences with their sports. They're all incredible athletes, and so it's going to be interesting to hear their journey in that and how Poland Syndrome kind of played a role. So just an introduction. Lewis, we'll start with you. If you can just tell everyone, who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Lewis Hatchett. I'm a former professional cricketer down in the south of the UK. I played for Sussex in Sussex, based in Hove, outside of Brighton. And I managed to achieve my goal of playing professional cricket at a young age, given that I was born with Poland syndrome. I think probably the biggest part of that was the fact that I had a brother. So playing a team sport, I know both Kim and Clay played individual sports. I know Kim, table tennis is a team sport, and there's parts of gymnastics that are team sport. But I think my getting into a team sport had a big role played by my brother. So my brother doesn't have Poland syndrome. He's sort of, I would say, fully able-bodied, and we were only 14 months apart. So my journey was sort of competing against him, and then I had like this huge dream and ambition to want to play this sport, and I got to watch games live, and then this huge passion ignited for me to want to play that sport, and I set my sights on it. And obviously playing in a sport with something like cricket, where you're surrounded by fully able-bodied athletes, I kind of hid my condition for quite a long time. People that knew me, they knew I had it, but if it was an opposition, it wasn't until I sort of retired in 2016 that there were some people, and a news article was done in The Guardian, and people found out about it. And then I had people saying, I didn't even know you had it. So I managed to hide it throughout my career. And that was just based on the fact that I never really wanted Poland syndrome to be the reason why I couldn't play the sport. And I could happily not play on merit, but like not due to the condition. So I'm excited to hear the stories of. I've spoken to Kim before, and I've only seen Clay really online, and I'm excited to hear their stories and their experiences as well. But that's a real overshot of mine to begin with, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And I think we'll just go down the line. For everyone who's listening, we have 3 guests on this podcast, all virtual. So it's going to be fun to try and juggle that. So we'll just kind of, follow the cameras. So Clay, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself as well.
Yeah, firstly, thanks a lot for having me. And I'm really excited to chat with you all and hear about different experiences. So I'm a professional gymnast. I'm on the Australian national team at the moment. I have been for a few years now. So my journey with Poland syndrome was relatively similar, I guess, in a way. But although I would like to hear a bit more about the ins and outs, as Lewis has just talked about his sort of upbringing. I had 2 older brothers. And, they like older brothers, would never let you get away with anything, and wouldn't let you use anything as an excuse as to why you weren't as good or anything like that. So I also had 2 very supportive parents that both physiotherapists, actually. And it was never, Poland syndrome for me was never used, and honestly was almost never even brought up when I was growing up. And I think that is something that allowed me to treat myself as everyone else is treating themselves, sort of fully able-bodied, is sort of how I progressed through my childhood, and actually wasn't even really aware of what it meant or what it was until I was a little bit older. But I actually had a cold. It's a bit embarrassing. That'd be embarrassing for me to say, but both my parents, physiotherapists, didn't notice that I hadn't got my right pec muscle. And yeah, so I had a cold and saw a doctor about my cold, and he was sort of, listening to my chest, and he said to my parents, he's got Poland syndrome, right? And my parents were like, yeah, just tell us a little bit more about that. So that's basically how it all happened for me. But yeah, sort of progressed through gymnastics as far as I could go. I loved the sport. My parents kept pushing me and said, if you want it, you're gonna have to work hard for it. Everyone else has to work hard for it. So give it a good crack if that's what you want. And that's sort of how I've ended up in the position that I'm in now. So
amazing. And Kim?
Hi, I'm Kim Daybell. I'm a para table tennis player. Yeah, I had a really similar experience to the other guys. Really, growing up, I had obviously a very supportive family who pushed me into playing sport at a really young age. I played able-bodied table tennis, sort of starting out up until the age of about 15, 16, and I think sort of similar to you guys, didn't really sort of address the whole Poland syndrome side of my life. I was diagnosed at a very young age because I think unlike the other guys, I think we'll get into it, but I've got a hand disability as well. It's not just the pec muscle, so there's obvious at birth. I suppose there was clearly something wrong, and I was diagnosed quite young, and I had operations when I was younger as well. So yeah, I up until about the age of 16, and then I started playing for the para team for the last sort of 12 years, playing in London and Rio, and then retired recently last October, actually, just sort of post Tokyo, and now working as a doctor in London. So it's a really interesting to kind of see it from both sides, really, because I think I've never met another patient, I suppose, with Poland syndrome. I think even knowing that I've got it, I think I probably even struggle to diagnose it because it's not something that's a sort of immediately obvious. Even looking directly at someone's chest, it can depend on sort of how big they are or how much exercise they do. So it'll be really interesting to get into it and to talk about it with you guys.
Yeah, and it's really cool that you're, working with the NHS now, because something that, is a big drive is getting that education out there with professionals, because there are so many doctors and so many people that, completely pass by it. They don't know, what they're looking for. And so just to kind of chime in, obviously I'm not a male with this experience, but, I was diagnosed when I was a baby, and it just happened by chance. The doctors didn't know. They thought that my mom had physically abused me and had broken my collarbone because my arm was kind of like swinging backwards. And my dad was in the medical field, and someone he knew just happened to know what Poland syndrome was. And, she assured my parents that I was going to be fine. And they said they must, get me into swimming as young as possible. And, kind of similar to what you guys were saying, and Clay and Lewis, was that the way I was raised as well was, it was never made into a big deal. I was very athletic, and I think the swimming really helped with that upper body strength and stuff as well. And kind of just, motivating me to not make it into a thing, not kind of use it as any kind of barrier. So that's why I'm also really excited to chat to everyone, because I feel like everyone has had that experience here with, sport actually helping, that kind of mindset. So Clay, you mentioned your diagnosis. How old were you when you were diagnosed?
I think I was around 6 or 7 years old. Yeah.
Okay.
So relatively young.
Yeah, because I know, Lewis, when we met, you said that you were diagnosed when you were born, right?
Yeah, I was really fortunate. I actually had the doctor that delivered me just said, "Oh, he's got Poland syndrome," which is quite amazing. That was quite the happenstance. So that was insane. And then I didn't actually meet anyone again who knew what it was. I'd had physios didn't know. I had to educate my physios on it as I was. So I really started getting into professional sports scene when I was around 15, and then was trying to push my way up. I got injured along the way, and I constantly had to go to. I'd fractured my spine when I was 16, and I had to go get a lot of scans and go see a lot of medical professionals, different ranges of disciplines, and I had to constantly educate them on it, and no one really knew what it was. I didn't really care at the time, but then I didn't meet someone until I was about 22, that I was just having a cardiac exam, and it was just a standard procedure. I was having my shoulders scanned for, at the time, throwing in, I think it was a university that were coming to do some work on us as athletes, and they were looking at rotator cuffs and deltoids for throwing in cricket. And as soon as I took my shirt off, the main physician was like, "Oh, you've got Poland syndrome," and then started talking to me about it. And then the really cool thing was actually they were doing ultrasound on muscle lengths and width, and they'd found how my right shoulder had actually compensated, and they were able to tell me what muscles were way bigger than what they meant to be, or bigger than what they were on the left side compared to the right, because of the the pec that wasn't doing it. And I always took a massive interest in anatomy. I ended up, once I was training as a PT, I ended up becoming a yoga teacher, and like I took a huge interest in anatomy all throughout my career. But I'd never had anyone sort of really dive into, okay, this is what your intricacies are. And then I got to go and meet a biomechanist at once. That actually triggered me going to see like a biomechanics guy who had done a load of tests and checked out strengths and different things like that. Because I was more concerned that I was with cricket, that how much damage could I be doing to my body just with, it's got a lot of force, and play, your sport has a lot of force and strength required in different positions. But with cricket being like an indirect force put on your body, plus people trying to hurl cricket balls at you at 90 mile an hour, like trying to make sure that there wasn't all these dangers.
And didn't you also have something else with your chest as well, where you had to kind of protect it?
Oh yeah, so my chest guard, I had it the other day, but it's my own piece of kit, which is because of cricket, there being people trying to hit you and hurt you with a cricket ball. So someone's actually trying to injure you. There was a chance that if I was to get hit in my chest with a cricket ball, given I'm left-handed batting, like if it was to hit where my pec's missing, it could puncture a lung, it could break ribs a lot easier. And I needed to protecting because the ball speed's so fast. So I had a Kevlar chest guard made, which is, it's bulletproof, which is awesome.
And Kim, what was your diagnosis story? And, I'm interested to know also what motivated you to get into sports as well.
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I was diagnosed very young. So when I was born, I had no fingers on my right hand. It was basically like chopped off there. Just had kind of like some small sort of nubbins, basically. And then, so I had an immediate diagnosis because I was thinking, and also I think there is sort of different levels, as you know, with sort of whether you're missing pec major or minor, or whether it's just sort of atrophied muscle, or whether there's anything there at all. And I think for as far as I know, I didn't have any pec major or minor muscle at all. So it was quite obvious, I think, looking at the chest wall when I was born. And then because of my hand, I think that this is the interesting thing about Poland syndrome, is it's sort of primarily a surgical condition, because at the end of it, apart from sort of therapy and all of that side of things, from a medical kind of point of view, it's only really surgical doctors that can provide any treatment for it, because the only treatment for it is going to be some form of operation, whether you have a sort of a lat dorsi graft put on to sort of create some muscle there, or whether they need to operate on your hands. So I was referred to a plastic surgeon at birth, and then they wait for you to sort of get a bit older. So when I was about 1.5, I think, they did bilateral toe transplant. So they take one, so these are my toes actually. So they take one toe off each foot, and then they stitch it onto your hand so that you can kind of like move and do lots of things. And I had an amazing surgeon actually. He sort of went on then to do the first hand transplant in Britain about 7 or 8 years ago now. And he's kind of a professor in plastic surgery, and he does all the reconstructions. That was the main reason I wanted to get into medicine, actually, because then he works in Leeds, which is where I went to study in the end. I'm from Sheffield, but I went over there, and his office just kind of backs onto the medical school. So I remember walking through on my first day as a medical student, and I didn't actually know that like that's where he was at the time. And I saw his name on the door, and I was like, I recognize that name. I'm sure I know that guy. So I like knocked on the door, and I went in, and he was like, I was like, I don't know if you remember me, but you operated on me sort of like 16 years ago. And he was like, no, I don't. Sorry, don't remember. I've done hundreds of these operations. And then I was like, oh, but do you remember this? And he was like, oh yeah, no, I remember that. I remember you. Yeah, how are you doing? And it was a really nice kind of full circle moment, I suppose, sort of having him operate on me all those years ago, and then coming through and sort of starting my career as a doctor 17 years later or whatever it was. So I guess I've been quite involved with it sort of through my whole life. I think from then going into sort of a medical kind of field, I kind of knew a lot about it, a lot of reading, a lot of research. It wasn't kind of like a new kind of thing for me. And then having all the input as well through sport, because I think that seems to be like the common factor between sort of all three of us, is obviously we're all athletic, we've all done a lot of sport, and we've all had a lot of involvement from people who know about Poland syndrome. And having then sort of joined the Poland Syndrome UK charity, PIP, which I think we kind of all know about in some way, meeting people who've had completely different experiences, really, who maybe weren't involved with sport at a young age, because that seems to be a really, really important thing to kind of keep you fit and well. Because actually I didn't realize all these complications, shoulder problems, back problems that all these people had, because I never had any of that really growing up, because I always played a lot of sport and sort of get the body strong. So that over the last couple of years, that's been really, really interesting. And in terms of sport, I mean, my mum's Chinese, my dad's English, so she was kind of quite a forceful Chinese mother, if you like. So she pushed me into just playing loads of sports. I played tennis, badminton, table tennis, swimming, did it all sort of to county level, and then table tennis was the one that kind of took over, and I've played for the rest of my life. I think I started when I was sort of 8 or 9, and went on obviously to play professionally, and it's been a massive part of my life growing up. So, but I'd be interested as well to hear about Clay's experience. I think because I would have thought of all three of us, gymnastics would be some major difficulties with Poland syndrome. But I'm sure he can tell us about it.
I'm fascinated by it for Clay's side because like cricket for me, I have on my right shoulder overworked because it's so one side dominant in the sport. So you're either left or right handed. When you're bowling, it's horrendous for your body, but you're one side on. So you're completely repetitive on that side. But from a gymnastics point of view, you're scored on symmetry. Everything has to be aligned. And for a condition that is asymmetrical, like I'm really interested to know your experience, like your physical experience of Poland syndrome in gymnastics. Like, have you had to work on certain things? Did you work from, I know you said your parents are physios, but did you work on like intricate muscle groups? Did you lift heavy weight? What did you do like to kind of get your physique to where it is now?
Tell us your secret, Clay. Tell us your secrets.
Yeah, I've got a notepad here ready.
Yeah, there's no secret really. Yeah, well, I think the fact that I got into sports so young was the only reason, the real reason and the only reason that I'm actually at the point that I'm at right now. So I think the fact that I was able to treat my body as if it was normal from a young age, like you were saying earlier, Lewis, allowed my body to adapt in a lot of ways. My right deltoid, the back of my shoulder on my right side, my right lat, the small part of my pec minor that I have, the whole right shoulder is noticeably bigger and stronger. And I think that comes down to just the body being as amazing as it is and adapting, because you sort of put it under a certain amount of stress and the body adapts to do what it can to make sure that you can, facilitate the movements that you're doing. So I think for me, the fact that I got into gymnastics when I was so young, and it is such a symmetrical sport, allowed my body to just basically work on as much symmetry as we could. I was actually interested, before logging on. I was going to ask you as well, Lewis, so for instance, for me, my sport's very much about being symmetrical. So even though there is, an asymmetry to me, I need to work on being symmetrical. I was wondering with cricket, it's like, were there certain techniques and things that you were able to adapt that wasn't necessarily normal for a cricketer that you adapted to because of your condition that allowed you to do what you're doing? Or were you able to run me through that a little bit?
I had to. So like I was always thinking, as you were talking, like if I was to have my time again, I would have done a lot more gymnastics training when I was younger. I wish when I have a kid, I 100% will put them into gymnastics early, whether they want to take that on as a profession. But I think from a physiological point of view, it's a really great sport to have people starting out in, because I think it just teaches your body how to be like you really work on some intricate muscles. The movements are some of them are unnatural, but some of them are really natural. And I think it sets you up as an athlete really early. So I would do that again in my time. And if there's any parents that have got kids that want to get their kids with Poland syndrome, I'd try and get them towards gymnastics, obviously depending on limb differences and things like that. But for me, I did have to adapt a few things. So one thing I found out very early on was I was left-handed batting. So my right side is often my weaker side. When you're a batsman in cricket, your top hand, which was my right hand, is meant to be your strongest hand, but it was my weakest hand. So like batting wise, you have to do things like technically you have to get your elbow up high, but the problem was I just didn't have the strength to do it. You have to like drive your arm through, and then I couldn't do that because my shoulder was just not strong enough, especially as a kid. So I was really bottom hand dominant. So I had to kind of tame my bottom hand not to be way too dominant, because it's a problem in cricket is if you're bottom hand dominant, then you try to like smack the ball and then you lose your technique and things like that. But then bowling wise, my right arm is really important because it's essentially the guide that drives all of your weight towards a target to begin with, but it also sets up your aim. So it's essentially the rudder that aims you in the direction you're trying to go. And it would be all right to start with, but anyone who doesn't play cricket, but at a professional level, you're meant to play 4 days in a row. If you play first class cricket and you can bowl up to 20 overs in a day, which is times that by 6, you can be bowling over 120 balls in a day plus. And it's really, like, people think of cricket being as quite a sport that's played on the village green, played by gentlemen, but like at a professional level, it is now fast and furious and it is intense. And what I found was my right side was just so unable to consistently get my right arm up, because I just literally couldn't reach my right arm up high enough and keep it there with enough stability to do it well. So what I ended up adapting was, one day I was just working away in the nets and my coach had literally given me this thing. He was like, you're not going to go anywhere until you can get your front arm up strong consistently. And I was like, Jesus, I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm not going to make it. So I'd go into the training facility on my own and after school and like try and find ways, and I'd just be working on this technique. And then one day I was like, well, what happens if I actually use my left side to my advantage, like use it instead of like try and fight it? So what I found was actually when I pulled my left shoulder back and used my strength in my left shoulder, my right shoulder just naturally came forward. And that just was like using my core. It was using the back of my left shoulder to bring my front of my right forward. That just gave me, whether it was like 10, 20, 30% more or less effort that I had to use on my right side, I was able to get my front arm up for longer. So it was just about doing that. And then catching a ball above my head, for example, that was actually something I never really told my teammates about, how hard that was for me to do, because the ball's moving so fast. So you got to get your arms above your head really, really quickly. And there were some days where I remember dropping some catches, and I only told my best mate really towards the end of my career that I was like, mate, it is actually really hard for me to catch a ball above my head. I just cannot get up there. But at the time, they're like berating me. They're like, mate, you just keep dropping catches. Like, this is shit. Like, what's going on? I'm like, sorry. Yeah, no. But yeah, that's down to the fact that cricket does require you to be essentially both-handed. Like, you've got to try and catch to your left and right. And like catching to my right was really hard. It still is really hard, but I would just spend hours at home trying to train it and trying to train my right side to just do that job. And if I could use my left hand, left side to come in and assist where it was possible. Sometimes it wasn't, sometimes it was. But yeah, there was loads of things. And I didn't really think about it when I was playing, right? I didn't actually, I just thought, oh, this is what everyone's kind of got to do. But then actually, as I got older, I was like, no, shoot, I'm the one that's having to work a little bit harder than everyone. But whenever I'm talking to a client or anything, I'm always a big opinion. Look, if you want to do something that no one else is doing, you're going to have to do things that no one else is doing. So that's always that's my opinion on it.
And I think like, especially when you are competing at such a high level, it's a balance of not letting things getting in the way, but also understanding where you might have to change certain things because you aren't like everyone else. So I think it's very much finding that balance. And Kim, I'm interested to hear your side as well, because, you know, you have a different kind of challenge to Clay and Lewis. So what were your challenges and how did you kind of navigate them?
Yeah, I mean, I think with table tennis, obviously, it's hard to explain for people who don't play so much, because it doesn't look like a kind of a sport, I think, that Poland syndrome would affect too badly. I mean, the hand side of things actually didn't affect me at all, really. I mean, apart from the ball toss with the serve, I had some minor issues, but actually that wasn't the problem. And if I'd have only had the hand disability, I actually wouldn't have qualified as a para athlete, because it's the chest wall problem that causes a lot of the issues. And I think basic in any racket sport, sort of weight transfer and how you get, and the same with cricket as well, by the sounds of things, obviously when you're bowling, is how you transfer that power through and then to generate a sort of the physical force that you need pushing forward, but also then to recover. So with table tennis, obviously the recovery is a massive thing, because you're so fast. You've got kind of 0.2 of a second or whatever it is to kind of get back after one shot before you're playing the next one. And it was always that kind of rotation, having the weakened shoulder, and it kind of sort of collapsed in a little bit, bringing that power through. It was almost like there was a block there, especially sort of when you're moving with the forehand. And I noticed that kind of growing up, because I was, as a sort of a 10-year-old, I was sort of number 2 in England as an able-bodied athlete. And then as an under 15, I kind of slipped down a little bit. I was sort of 3 or 4. And the coaches were never quite sure why, because as I was going up the age groups, my kind of level was, even though I was training as much as everyone else, it looked, I know, I was working as hard as everyone else. The results kind of weren't quite as good. And there were always sort of lads getting a bit better than me as I was getting older. So, and then when I was 18, it was kind of, 5 or 6. And then you're on the borderline of the national team at that point. And that's when sort of the para team approached me and said, have you ever thought about sort of para sport? Because you were definitely qualified. Never thought about it then. And that was pre-London 2012, because I think London 2012 was where para sport really kind of kicked off, and where it became something that the public watched and it became in the public eye. And I'd never, like I said, never really thought about doing it. So I joined the team then. And then once I'd kind of joined the para team and they were looking at me as a para athlete, not as an able-bodied athlete, that's where I actually started to make much bigger strides forward and make a lot of improvements. And because I adapted my technique in a way that I was trying to play like an able-bodied athlete before, and struggling to do that. I couldn't do it, I couldn't hit the ball as hard, I couldn't be as fast as the other guys. So actually, once I started working with para coaches, they were like, well, why don't you do things like this, and try and adapt your game to compete. And that worked really well. And then actually it kind of came circle again, and I ended up in the top, sort of back in the top 10 sort of able-bodied senior men for a large portion of my career. Even though I didn't play for the able-bodied team again, I stayed on with the Paralympic team. But it is interesting how you need to kind of adapt and change, especially at that highest level of sport. Because I think when you're a bit younger and you're not playing at the top level, you don't notice as much. But when you're trying to compete with guys where it's literally sort of fractions and all the marginal gains things and all that kind of stuff, those small things make a huge difference. So that was kind of my experience as a young athlete moving through. And it was quite hard. I don't know, I think it sounds like Lewis probably found it quite hard as well, because it was difficult for me, because I when I was younger, I could never understand why I wasn't quite sort of progressing as quickly as I would. And like, everyone's saying, you've got loads of talent, you're going to be top player, like you just got to keep moving forward with it, and just sort of getting older and slipping down. And when I was 16, 17, I had a real kind of, I nearly left the sport at that point, because I was on the borderline of the national team, having been one of the top players for 6-7 years. And that was a really hard time. And actually, para sport kind of saved me really. And I'm very, very grateful that I got to compete with all those athletes. And once I started doing that, a whole new world kind of opened up to me, because obviously I see loads of para athletes who with sort of major disabilities, and watching the way they adapt and the way they play their sport is really been sort of an incredible thing to witness. So.
Yeah, it's incredible. And this kind of brings me to my next question that, I kind of want to hear from everyone, but I'll start with Clay. Besides, the challenges in sports, were there any kind of emotional challenges that you had to deal with in maybe accepting that you had Poland syndrome, or, did you experience any of those or not?
Yeah, a little bit. I think that through high school, sort of when I was going through puberty, obviously that's when for men is like a big period of like, when you're 12 to sort of 15, it was like the taller, broader, more developed guys were like the attractive guys, or the guys that were cool and like could play these sports and were masculine, and those sort of things. And I think during those sort of periods was when, I worked really hard, so I was quite lean. So my pec was super noticeable, and it still is. So that was something that I had to sort of dance with a little bit. Again, I was going through, Lewis, actually, one of your posts on Instagram. You talked a little bit about like excuses and like being unlucky and people talking about that sort of stuff. And it's just about adapting and sort of working towards your strengths. And I think you said something like, you're allowing your ego and excuses to get in the way, sort of accept where you're at and get going, sort of thing. And I heard this other quote, which was about something completely different, and not about sport, but it was about, are you interested in the goals you've set, or are you committed to them? And I think that there's a massive difference. And I think that's a big difference that I see with people when they're making excuses for anything. If someone's committed to the goals that they've set, it's not like they don't have the excuses. They're all there. They just don't use them. And I think for me personally in my sport, it was, well, both out of my sport and in my sport, it was sort of like an excuse to feel sorry for yourself. But it was like, well, you can either sit down here and sort of feel sorry for yourself, or basically you can go work hard in the gym and be a professional athlete and see what they say then. Or it's So it's just about sort of working on those goals and trying to, and it's not easy to do. It's really not easy to do, but trying to set your mind to things that you can control and taking responsibility of the things that you can take responsibility of, and having pride in that responsibility. So there were definitely a few times, and even sort of through high school, like thinking about the sort of doing a bit of research on the option of chest implants and then things like that to try to look normal and all sort of stuff, which I'd be interested to hear about all of you really on your experiences with thoughts like that and if you've had them. But yeah, I definitely went through that sort of stage outside of sport. And then inside of sport, there's all the insecurities as well. There's certain things in gymnastics that I find very difficult compared to other people. And it's a mindset that I've been told to use for a long time, and I've told myself to use it for a long time, but I've only just started actually using it. And it's sort of, I mean, you can either care about what people think or you can care about how you can get better. And I come in here and there's sometimes I work very hard, but I'd avoid certain movements because I know I was weak at them and I know other people could do them easy. And as sort of, if we had a camp with junior athletes in here, I'm one of the national team members. I don't want to see me failing at something that they all can do easy, that they could do when they were 10 years old. And it got to a point where I was like, you know what, actually, the only way I'm ever actually going to be able to do that if I work on it. So I'm sort of throwing the whole, I feel embarrassed about doing this, and it's just working hard. It's everyone has their difficulties and whether like their challenges that they face and whether they be mental or physical. It's about sort of, you know, grabbing the bull by the horns and sort of running with your strengths and tackling your weaknesses head on, I think is just really, really important. It's not an easy mindset to get, but it all comes down to whether the goals you've set, whether you're committed to them or whether you're just interested in what they might look like.
Yeah. I like, just adding on to that, I think my experience was growing up, I was very similar. Like I stayed really lean. So it was really obvious as I was developing as a youngster. And I remember this very sort of seminal moment when I was at a swimming pool, because that's when I've got my shirt off. Gymnastics, you obviously got your shirt full time. So in cricket, I could keep a shirt on. We're playing with kit on. And I was at a swimming pool and there were these kids in front of me and they'd noticed it, and I could hear them talking about it. And they're like, oh, God, what is that? And things like that. And that was like, as a probably 13, 14-year-old, that's like hit you quite hard, because it's like seeing these older kids talking down to you, right? But one thing I did, similar to what Clay's talking around there, was I was in a team sport. So I was in fully able-bodied guys. Like these are, I played my first ever first team senior men's game when I was 14 years old. So I was in a changing room full of men that are talking about all sorts of life experiences, and I'm not having any of them. And I'm just literally trying to play this sport. And I'm also partly trying to not only be as good as them, but be better. And I've got all these aspirations. And I think the way I combated it, looking back, and it's something I use now with clients, whether it's an athlete, business owner, or a student that I'm working with, is that what Clay was talking around is essentially this kind of character that you want to create. So like, what's the persona that you want to create? What's the person? If you to look back on your time right now and the experiences you're going through, the challenges you're going through, how do you want people to describe you? How do you want to describe yourself? And what would you need to do, say, or think in order to be proud of yourself when you look back on this moment? And I think that can be loads of different things. For me, the one I chose was bravery and courage. So I chose to do some of the more challenging things in my sport, because then I felt if I can do those, then no one can really see me as taking a step back. I'm taking a step forward. I'm willing to do the things that no one else is doing, despite having this setback and disadvantage to all of them. And that allowed me to then gain a lot of respect in groups, that people, yes, there's banter in sports teams. And I think that hardened my skin as well. That really allowed me, sometimes to my detriment, it gave me sort of this emotional shell to some parts of my life that I was able to combat. And I didn't I didn't hide away. I just fought back, in a sense that I just wanted to show even more that I was brave, I was courageous, I was hardworking, I was committed. And that I almost wanted to be able to look back at people and go like, look, I achieved this thing and you had far more than me. Why can't you? And like, that was my attitude. And I think sometimes there's also the part that if you do have a disadvantage, it can hardwire you a little bit like that. But I'm getting more and more messages from people on social media that whether they're parents that have got kids that have got Poland syndrome, and they're super worried about like the bullying that they're going to get. Like they're already sort of planning this storyline that's going to happen probably 10, 14 years down the line. And it's like, I think the common thread for all of us has been putting ourselves into sport, putting ourselves into challenging environments, and then not when you undoubtedly fail, because all of us would have felt some sort of failure on a consistent basis, right? A consistent basis. It teaches you about to value yourself, to overcome those challenges, to just have another crack. Because if you are, like Clay was saying, are you committed to it? If you can just commit yourself to something, you'll stay in it far longer and know what that goal is and know what the end dream is. And I think that was something that I ended up doing. And I'm a really big believer in creating that character that you want to be, or having an idea of this ideal version of yourself, trying to live up to that, because then you have your values, you have your motivations, you have all these things that you're seeing yourself as, and you've now got a guide to where you want to take yourself.
I love that. And Lewis, like you were saying, I also have, parents and people with Poland syndrome, reaching out to me on Instagram, and they're worried about, what sports their children can play and if they'll be okay. And this is something that I love so much about sports, is that it doesn't just develop, obviously, your physical strength, but it's so mental as well. And I think, learning what kind of person you want to be, learning how to goal set, learning how to fail, is really important for anyone. But I think especially, for people with Poland syndrome, it really puts emphasis on what your body can do rather than what it looks like. And I think that's been, at least for me, that's been a game changer, because it's like you were saying, Lewis, like having parents, almost pre-prepared to have those conversations with their kids, I think is important. But, from my parents' experience, it was a thing of, be prepared if your child comes and speaks to you about their concerns, but don't ever push that onto them, if they're not having those experiences. And I never ended up chatting to my parents because I never felt like it was ever an issue. But I think a lot of those values and a lot of those lessons do come from, being in a sporting environment. I can't emphasize that enough, to get their kids, people's kids into sports. And Kim, I wanted to ask you, Clay was mentioning about, the surgery processes, and what does that kind of look like on the male side?
I mean, I think from a surgery point of view, it's actually very similar. So even from male to female, obviously on the female side, sort of the breast side of things obviously is a really important thing, because it can affect the breast quite badly in the way it appears or the way it feels as well, because it can be quite painful. I think not having that sort of that pec there to sort of anchor the breast tissue. But the operations are very similar. I mean, obviously with my hand, there's lots of different things that can be done. But from a chest point of view, it's really just they can take a graft from your lat normally, and they can put it onto the front, and then you've got a viable muscle there that can grow. It's something that I've been kind of working on through Poland Syndrome UK. I'm kind of working on some research at the moment, because the issue with Poland Syndrome is that because the options are surgical, but actually there's a lot of evidence to show that the graft in the lat dorsi operation functionally doesn't provide a lot moving forward. Aesthetically it can do, but there's lots of issues, I think, with people who've had the operation when they were younger, and actually then the muscle has atrophied anyway, because it's quite hard to build and it's not where it was designed to be, and it doesn't actually create the look that people kind of are looking for. I think you assume you're going to have that sort of graft done, then you're going to be kind of like, benching 100 kilos after that, but it's never going to be that way generally. And actually functionally your lats do a lot more than your pecs. So we need to try to kind of get away from pushing surgery onto parents and onto kids, because quite often they'll go and see their GP in the UK. GP will refer them to the plastic surgeon. Plastic surgeon will say, I can do this operation if you want it. You guys decide whether you want it or not. And that's often people will take that option to take the surgery, because it feels like you're actively doing something to counteract your Poland syndrome, I suppose, if you like. But actually that's probably not the best option. The actual best option would be to have a sort of a MDT approach, have a physio, a psychologist as well if they're struggling with it mentally, which is what in the UK Sam, who's the head of PIP, is trying to promote at the moment. She's running these MDT days with surgeons, medics, physios and psychologists to come to the right conclusion. So it's exciting, and hopefully it'll kind of all take off and help people, because I think that the stress is often on the parents in terms of, like, my mum and dad had that as well. They said, you know, because you make that decision if your child's going to have surgery at the end of the day, that falls on you. You have all the help of medical professionals, but surgeons want to operate. So, you know, that's what they're always going to kind of advocate for. And actually it takes quite a lot of bravery to say, actually, no, I don't want that. I think, you know, we're going to go down this route. And you won't see the result of that for 15 years, because you'll have to wait for your kid to grow up before you know whether the right decision's been made or not. So it's a really tricky thing, and I think it's something we need to support. But I think kind of, going back to what Lewis was saying, I'm a big believer in that people will treat you how you present yourself. And I think the thing that sport provides, which is what you were talking about, is it takes everything away. You know, it takes difference, color, creed, disability, everything. It's just the field and who's better on the day, and that's what I really love about it. And I think it gives people that confidence, and also, if you're good at it, it gives you that, you know, that proof of results that no one can ever argue with. You know, I had the same thing growing up, sort of older kids making jokes, and especially in that able-bodied environment, where even in table tennis, you know, they're 16-year-old sort of guys, and they, you know, they're strong, muscly guys, and they do a lot of sport, and I look different kind of to them. But if I knew that I'd beaten them moving forward, then I could say, well, you can't say anything really, to be honest, because that was the result at the end of the day. It doesn't matter whether I've got a peck or not. But the interesting thing for me, I think, is when I moved into parasport, that transition was really difficult, because when they first approached me, I said no initially, because I didn't want to see myself as a disabled athlete, I suppose. And that I found that really hard. And I had a lot of chats with people about it, and eventually got over that kind of silly insecurity. And once I made it into the para world, it really changed things in the way I approached my disability. I didn't see it as something I needed to hide. And actually, it wasn't even something I needed to overcome, because suddenly my disability opened up all these doors to, you know, go abroad and play in the Paralympics and do all these sort of amazing things that I wouldn't have been able to do if I didn't have a disability, unless I was kind of made it in the able-bodied circuit. But working with all those guys was great, because they're so open and honest about their disability, and you laugh about it together, and you joke about it, and you play tricks on each other, whatever. I've got like a strap that I use for the gym to help me with pulls, and I always, if you're doing like bench pull, I always needed someone to unstrap me, and they just used to like leave me strapped there to the thing. And I just think that kind of thing's great. Like it really, making light of your disability was a really sort of really good thing for me, and it built my self-confidence a lot. And I think, like I said, people will treat you how you present yourself, and if you're confident and you're open and you know with other people, actually that's what I always say to parents is if you can encourage your children to be like that, there won't be whispering behind your back and things, but you'll talk about it and they'll understand you, and that makes a huge difference, I think.
I think if you like own it.
Yeah. The surgery thing's really interesting. My parents growing up made me very aware that there was surgery available, and they said, we will not allow you to do this until you're 18, like until you're sort of conscious of mind, conscious of body. And I growing up, I always said that I didn't want it done, because I was actually worried about a lot of those issues that you'd said about functional issues. And I was like, well, if this is going to get in the way of me playing cricket and doing any sport, like now I'm golf, I swim, I run, I do everything. Like, and I was like, I don't want this to impede that for something that I feel that I can work on my self-image. Like I can work on my self-worth and my self-image first. And I think if I do that, and that's again my biggest go back to any parent is like, look, don't worry about the functional side. Like there's so many things, like use us as examples, right? That you can do a lot of things. But if you build up their self-worth, if you focus on that more often than not, you'll get a decent human being coming out of it. And you talking about the para sport, I actually, when I finished retired, someone approached me to train in para swimming. So I did a year worth of para swimming to try and make the para team in the UK. I ended up getting to the assessment, and the problem I'd had was I'd actually trained my right side to deal with cricket so much that I was too strong for the assessment. So I wasn't almost imbalanced enough. So I didn't fall into a category, neither could I compete in like fully able-bodied swimming. So I was like, oh, this is rubbish. But then I actually got a call from the England disability cricket team and was asked to be they actually first asked me to play. And I was like, I've played full first class cricket. Like I don't actually, this is not going to be where I'm going to end up playing. I'm sorry. But I said, they then asked me to coach. And the thing that blew me away in that environment was because they'd actually had a change of coach. They had Ian Salisbury come in, and he encouraged these guys to embrace their imperfections and embrace their disabilities. And they'd had guys who had prosthetic limbs, and they would wear trousers all the time and they'd hide it. And Ian made like a standard rule. He was like, I want you to wear shorts and I want you to own it. I want you to go out there and embrace it. And he said, if anything, I don't care if you win games or lose games. I just really want to encourage you to embrace what you're about. And then by the time we'd got to this World Series, and we sadly lost the final to India, it was an incredible game, incredible tournament. The thing that was awesome was then like the banter that just goes on in that dressing room, and just the sort of self-deprecating humor, and how much it just levels everything, right? It just, that's it. Some people hide from it, and it's like, no, embrace it. Like I used to embrace it all the time within my team. And then you've got guys that are playing like drinking rules. They're doing end of tournament drinking games, and they're like no right arm drinking, and like the guy with only a left arm's got it, and it's like it's all these different things that they were just embracing. And I think people now, it's harder. I think now in the world we live in, it's way harder, that we live in a world where people are just being pushed towards a perfectionistic idea of what you need to look like, and it's going to be really challenging for young kids. I'm really interested, Clay. I think with gymnastics, you've majority of the time got your shirt off. So have you ever felt like an expectation to look and be a certain way? Had the surgery sort of crept into your mind at some stage?
Yeah, I mean, the surgery crept into my mind basically because it was more social stuff, like in the gym again. In the gym was sort of my safe space in a way, even though it was the only place I had my shirt off all the time, because we were in there to get a job done. And the guy next to me wasn't going to make fun of me because I was beating him. So like, he wasn't going to be able to make fun of me until he started beating me. And I wasn't going to let him start beating me. So that was almost a safe space. But kind of as you guys talked about, there was jokes and stuff like that. And I've got a lot of experiences with that now, living at the Australian Institute of Sport. My roommate's vision impaired. A lot of my friends here have either one leg or no legs or one arm. And there's a lot of that sort of stuff. And I think those guys, and living around a lot of Paralympians and successful people with body impairments, has just been like a massive light for me. There was a guy who I look up to a lot, Scotty Reid, and he ran a couple of Paralympics and won some medals. And I got a message. I've torn my ACL 3 times as well. So I got a message from him after the second or third one, I think it was. And I think it was a message something like, I can't believe it's happened again, mate. I'm so sorry. I can't believe it's happened to you. And I'm thinking, how can I sit here and feel sorry for myself when, I can get that fixed. So this guy's got one leg, and look at the insanely incredible things this guy can achieve, and he's doing. It's sort of, all right, jump back on the horse. I mean, it's about perspective for me, and it's having people like that around you, and having people that inspire you, and having people that are able to overcome obstacles it just puts everything into perspective. And like I kind of said before, everyone's got something they're dealing with. And sort of Giselle talking a little bit about parents and them sort of thinking about, like, oh, what do we have to do, like, to avoid XYZ happening to our child when they grow up. But the fact is, there are so many things, there's so many dangers, there's so many things that can happen to all of us in our lifetime. If you're going to try to protect everyone from everything, then you just wouldn't be able to. So it comes down to just supporting your children and encouraging them to be confident in what they want to do, and giving them the tools to be confident, and to work hard towards what they love doing. Because at the end of the day, there's always going to be some sort of bullying, no matter what it is about. And another quote that I really love is, what does it start with? It's something like, shouting affirmations in the mirror isn't what builds comfort. Working so hard and building an abundance of work behind you to prove that who you say you are is who you are. That's how you build confidence. Sort of outwork your doubt, outwork everyone else's doubt. And I think that is super important, and that's something that has driven me a lot. But sort of back to what you said, Lewis, so a bit of a tangent there, but in the gym, it's sort of it's always been, I look at guys and I'm like, in a way it's like, oh, it's always when you're a bit tired and you're a bit fatigued, you've been working hard, and you look up and you're like, oh God, that would be nice, But if I had that, if it wasn't as difficult for me to work, but I've always run by the idea that nothing worth getting is easy, and if you can get something easy in the long run, it's not worth it. So, yeah, it's really about perspective for me, putting it in perspective and working hard and setting goals, and achieving things despite the obstacles you have. You have to.
I love that. And I feel like because it's harder, it's just so much better when you do achieve it. And I think that's something that we all have that opportunity to feel. And I love, Clay, what you were saying about perspective and, what you guys were all saying about like owning it. If you own who you are as a person, then people can say whatever they want and it won't affect you, And so that would be my piece of advice to parents if they are worried about, their children potentially being bullied, is teach them to love themselves, teach them to have confidence in themselves, because oftentimes that can deflect bullying a lot, and own it. And I feel like we could honestly talk forever here. I think we might honestly need to have another episode, but just to kind of wrap everything up, I'm interested to hear if you guys have any piece of advice for parents who either have Poland syndrome or who have kids that have Poland syndrome. What piece of advice would you give them? Kim, will go with you, Lewis, and then back to Clay.
I mean, I think the best piece of advice I could give is that don't think about what they can and can't do. Just think about what they want to do, and help them to achieve that. I think that, there's nothing that can't be achieved in this world. And I think I've seen, through the para side, I've seen people do, amazing things. They're playing table tennis with no arms, and you're like, how is anyone meant to do that? And well, growing up for me, whenever I was nervous or didn't know if I could do something, my parents would always be very much, well, you will be able to do it. There'll just be a different way for you. It was never about trying to funnel you into something that you would be able to do, if that makes sense. So I guess it's just don't let it define kind of who you are. It is a part of who you are, and it's important to accept that and to love that part of yourself, but not to let it define what you are going to go and do in this life, or how people are going to treat you.
I love that.
Yeah, I think the acceptance piece is huge. I think that's, once we can get to a place where you accept what you've got, then you can actually move on to whatever those dreams and ambitions you are. But like, sort of looking at everything that we've spoken about, the majority of, I think, what all of us have been talking around is around this character, like whether it was beating the person next to us, or proving people wrong, or proving yourself right, whatever it might be, or overcoming a challenge, coming back, having perspective. It really defines around like the character that you want to be. So I always think when parents are coming with these issues of, I'm worried about this kid being my child being bullied, it's like, well, you can either look at that as like an obstacle or an opportunity. Like you can use them to inspire other kids, like to be able to combat that through the way in which you teach them to deal with it. So there's multiple different ways, but I think building out your character, like figuring out the character that you want to be. What do you want people to be saying about you? What do you want to say about yourself? What would you want your 80-year-old version of yourself to say about you when you look back on how you grew up? And that for me has always been a big driver. I ended up really wanting to be a role model. Like that was something I was very early on set out to be. And I get the opportunity to do that now. And that was and it's not coincidence. It was partly manufactured in the fact that I knew that I wanted to be this type of person. I wanted people to say certain things about me. And then when you do that, when you set out this kind of guide and handbook of what that looks like, it's very easy to fill in the rest of it. It's very easy to fill in that gap between where you currently are and where you want to be, because you kind of know, like, I need to do these, I need to think this way. I maybe need to do these actions when I'm faced with this sort of challenge. I want to take this road rather than that road. And then it becomes a much clearer path, rather than thinking, oh my God, everything coming at me, this is so difficult, this is so challenging. So, okay, well, you can look at it like that, or your perspective could be, what would the person that I want to be, how would they deal with this? If not, go find a role model. Find a role model. Find someone to look up to. Look at the decisions they've made, the challenges they've faced, and how they dealt with them. And then that can guide you towards understanding the landscape much easier.
Love that.
Right, yeah, tough acts to follow there, but yeah, I think both of the guys hit it on the head there, really. But yeah, well, I would give people advice, regardless of what they're struggling with, or regardless of what obstacles they have to overcome, would be to listen and to learn and to investigate, but not so much that it distracts you from getting started. I think getting started and putting your first foot forward is always the most important and sometimes the hardest thing to do. So I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of this too, we live in a world where there's so much advice and there's so many things and so much information available that you spend so much of your time seeking out this advice that advice actually serves as a procrastinator to actually getting going. And I think the best way to learn is by trying and by making mistakes and then learning from those mistakes. So a big piece of advice that I would have is just to get started and learn on the run. We all have to do it. No one's situation is exactly the same. No piece of advice that someone gives you is going to be exactly pertainable to your situation. You're going to have to pick apart pieces of advice anyway to skew it towards how it's going to help you. So get started and be confident in the direction you're going and be adaptable to changing what you're doing.
I love that. Guys, thanks so much. This was probably one of my favorite episodes to record. And, thanks for sharing all of your experiences. Hopefully we can hop on another call soon because I feel like there's so much to unpack still. But, Lewis, Clay, Kim, again, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for listening. And we're excited to continue, raising awareness and talking about Poland syndrome. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow us and subscribe to our podcast and follow us on our social media platforms, Instagram and Facebook. See you soon.